All right, let's dive into a question that's kind of at the crossroads of scripture and ancient history, and it's a really fascinating one. So, did Jesus ever reference the Book of Enoch? A text that you won't find in most Bibles. And look, this isn't just some historical trivia. The answer really gets to the heart of the world Jesus lived in, the ideas that were floating around, and maybe even how those ideas shaped the New Testament itself. So, why does this even matter? Well, think about it. If he did, it suggests that the Book of Enoch was a really influential part of the spiritual world he lived in. It's like it gives us a richer context for the Gospels. It helps us get a feel for the cultural and theological air that Jesus and his earliest followers were breathing. Okay, so before we can even start looking for clues in the Gospels, we got to get our heads around the book at the center of this whole mystery, the Book of 1 Enoch. So the first thing that jumps out here is the timing. I mean, look at this. The Book of Enoch isn't some later text trying to piggyback on the Bible. It's actually older. It was written and passed around before and during the life of Jesus. That means it was part of the library of ideas that was available to people back then. So the Book of Enoch falls into this category of writings called the pseudo-epigrapha. Now, that sounds complicated, but it just means falsely ascribed. But that doesn't mean they were trying to trick people. See, back then, attributing a text to an ancient, super respected figure like Enoch, Genesis says this guy walked with God, it was a way of saying, hey, the wisdom in here is ancient and divinely inspired. And the main takeaway here, this book was a big deal. Seriously, they found fragments of it all over the place with the Dead Sea Scrolls. That tells us that, the community at Qumran was definitely reading it and copying it. And it wasn't just them. Early Christians held it in really high regard too. So even though it didn't make the final cut from most Bibles, it was super popular and considered authoritative by a lot of people. Okay, let's get into the clues. The investigation really kicks off with a very specific and really powerful title. So if you read the Gospels, you'll see Jesus refers to himself with a very specific title all the time, the Son of Man. It's his most common self-reference, a huge part of his identity. But where did that title get its meaning? Yeah, it shows up in the Old Testament, especially in the book of Daniel. But the book of Enoch, it uses that same title in a way that is, well, you'll see, it's strikingly similar. Okay, just look at this side by side. On the left, you've got 1 Enoch, written way before Matthew. It says, when they see the Son of Man sitting on the throne of his glory. Then, over on the right, you've got Matthew's Gospel describing Jesus' return. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Come on. The language, the imagery of this powerful judging figure on a throne, it's incredibly close. And this really gets to the core of it. In both of these texts, the Son of Man isn't just, a man. He's a king. He's this exalted end-times figure who is there to execute judgment. And it's that mix, the Son of Man who is also a royal judge, that's such a powerful link between these two books. But the Son of Man connection, as strong as it is, isn't the only clue. It goes deeper. These texts seem to share a whole vocabulary when it comes to the end times. When you read the big apocalyptic parts of the Gospels, and then you read the Book of Enoch, it almost feels like you're in the same universe. Both are just packed with these dramatic scenes of final judgment, the big role that angels play, all this vivid end times imagery, and of course, descriptions of a heavenly throne. And right at the center of it all, the Son of Man as the final judge. But it's super important to be balanced here. A lot of scholars, like David Ketchbull in this quote, would argue that this doesn't automatically mean Matthew is copying from Enoch. The other idea is that maybe both texts were just pulling from the same, much older well of ideas. These Jewish apocalyptic traditions that had been bubbling up for generations, inspired by books like Daniel and Isaiah. Okay, so with all these shared themes and the similar language, you have to ask the big question, right? Is there a smoking gun? Did Jesus ever actually quote the book word for word? And the simple answer is no. For all the echoes and the similarities we see, there is not a single recorded instance of Jesus saying, as it is written in the Book of Enoch, or anything like that. So if you're looking for that kind of direct, explicit quote from Jesus himself, you're not going to find it. But wait, the story doesn't stop there, because another New Testament writer, Jude, who was the brother of James, does explicitly quote the Book of Enoch. Look at this. He directly quotes a passage from the very first chapter, and even says it was a prophecy from Enoch himself. This quote from Jude is huge. It's definitive proof that the Book of Enoch was absolutely on the radar of the early church. People knew it, they read it, and for a writer like Jude, it was considered authoritative enough to use in his own letter. And that one fact, well, it keeps this whole debate about Enoch's influence wide open. So, what do we do with all this? We've got strong parallels, no direct quote from Jesus, but a direct quote from Jude. All of this puts us right in the middle of a really fascinating scholarly debate. And really, the debate boils down to two main perspectives. On one hand, you have the indirect influence idea. This is the argument that one Enoch was just so popular, it basically shaped the theological air that Jesus and his followers were breathing. It gave them the language and concepts like Son of Man to understand what was happening. On the other hand, you have the shared tradition perspective. This view says that no, Jesus and Enoch weren't borrowing from each other. They were both just drawing from the same older Jewish traditions, from books like Daniel and Isaiah. The parallels are there because they have a common ancestor, not because one copied the other. So, in the end, we can't prove that Jesus ever sat down and, read the Book of Enoch cover to cover. But maybe that's not even the right question. Maybe the more profound question is this. If the Book of Enoch really did shape the spiritual atmosphere of the first century, how much did it shape the way people understood Jesus? As you can see, there's no simple yes or no answer here. But what the evidence does is open this incredible window into the rich, complex world of ideas that Christianity grew out of. So, the discussion continues. What's your perspective? We'd love to hear what you